Good. So, hi everyone. I'm really glad that you're here. And whether you're joining live or watching the replay, this will be on replay. So if you can't see the whole thing, you can always watch back later. Or if there's something that you want more clarity on, might need to watch again, you can. Just by going onto the YouTube feed and the presentation that I'm going to take you through. I'm not going to take everyone through the full presentation. It's going to take you through chunks, but you will get access to the full presentation. If you're on my mailing list, everything will come up, and you'll get the whole thing, right? And what I want to say is this space. It exists for understanding and exists for clarity, exists for growth. What it doesn't exist for is judgment, right? And what this means and what this isn't. Before we get into today's topic, I just want to make something clear about, what we're doing. We're not diagnosing narcissism, and we're not labeling people, and we're not pathologizing anyone, including you, right? Because this is about proving what someone else is or isn't. What this is actually about is healing, and this is actually about recovery. And this is about understanding what happened to you and how people, change over time in these relationships and why this conversation actually matters. Because one of the most painful experiences survivors talk about is not just the relationship itself, but how misunderstood they feel afterwards. Because, friends and family, they may say, it was just a bad relationship. And all relationships go through their ups and downs. Why didn't you leave? All of those things. But what often goes unrecognized is the depth of psychological conditioning that happens gradually over time. And this isn't about a single fight, right? It's not about one bad moment. It's more about what happens to the mind and the nervous system and the sense of self when patterns get repeated quietly and silently and consistently and strategically, right? Because what we're talking about here is your lived experience and the credibility that you have for your own recovery. And I understand this work is not just, professionally, but it's also personally. Because, I've got the experience because I've lived it, right? And I've experienced what many people have already done. And professionally, it's just like, I've been doing this work. Recovery's been around since about 2019. I've supported over 1,000 clients through the recovery from toxic and abusive relationship dynamics. And I've got my narcissistic abuse clinician training from Dr. Ramani. And then I hold about, a dozen other certificates as well across different things. Just going to see if we can mute. Good. We'll unmute during the question and answer period. But yeah, and I share this not just to say that I've got these qualifications, but it's just to reassure you, because what we're talking about today is grounded in everything I do has been studied and it's deeply familiar to me. And I'm going to introduce, the core of what we're going to talk about today, because today we're going to look at something very specific, right? And it's not the person, and it's not the diagnosis, and it's not the drama. We're going to go look at the timeline, right? Because what happens in these is emotional erasure, and it doesn't happen all at once, but through a sequence of experiences that train someone slowly to move away from themselves. And when we see this as a timeline, a lot of the confusion that we feel just begins to lift. And people stop asking, what's wrong with me, and start realizing, oh, this is how grooming works. And that's what we're going to talk about today. Because as we go through this, you're welcome to post your comments in the chat. And if you don't have the right words, it's okay. You don't have to share a lot of details. But I'll respond to as many as that I can. And we'll also leave space for questions, and we'll talk one-on-one with each other towards the end. And I'll speak to as many of you as possible. All right. So with that said, I'm going to walk you through the timeline and set you up because last session we did talk about the toxic abuse cycle and the whole video from 2 weeks ago. I'm just going to post that in the comments. You can just click on that and just so it's open, and you can go through the parts that I'm going to skip. But yeah, and whether you're joining me live or you're watching this on the replay, just hear this. The fact that you're here actually matters, and it tells me something inside you is awake, is curious, is ready to be understood, and understanding what actually happened to you, so you don't blame yourself, right? And it's not to obsess over them either, but it is to reclaim your own clarity. So if you're live, welcome to post your questions and reflect them in the chat. And if you're watching in the replay, just leave your comments below, and I'll read them and respond to as many as I can. I just want to make clear that this space is for you and why we're here tonight. We're going to focus on toxic abuse, and it's not in a clinical way, but not in a sensational way. But we're doing this for one reason, so you can understand the grooming that happens in these relationships. And the core understanding of that is so you stop blaming yourself. Because one of the most damaging myths that a survivor can carry is this: I should have known, right? Or the belief that I chose this, or I deserve this. Or, regret from saying I stayed too long, so it must be my fault. And that belief alone can keep people stuck for years. And what this talk about, it's not about diagnosing narcissists, right? It's about labeling exes or parents or bosses or whoever the abuser was. It's a understanding it can be helpful, but what tonight is actually about is you. It's about understanding. It's how to trust was built, how the attachment was formed, and how the confusion replaced clarity, and how your nervous system was trained slowly and strategically over time to tolerate things you never would have expected in the start. And what that is actually called is called grooming. You were groomed. And grooming doesn't mean that you're weak. It means that you're a human. That's why the abuse cycle matters. The toxic abuse cycle explains something that many survivors can't put into words. Why it felt so good in the beginning, and why it became so confusing in the middle, and why it felt so hard to leave, even when something you knew was wrong. And the cycle isn't random, and it's not accidental. And it doesn't happen all at once. It happens gradually, and it happens in stages while trust and hope are still alive. And that's why, intelligent and capable, empathetic people just get caught in these dynamics. We do get targeted. And it's not because, we lack insight, but it's because the manipulation is woven into human connection itself. And when people hear the word grooming, they often think it's something obvious or extreme. But in emotionally abusive relationships, grooming is very, very subtle. An intense connection starts early on, and feeling chosen or deeply seen, emotional intimacy, it tends to outpace reality. And what you're going to find is those small boundary crossings, they don't feel dangerous at first. But, being slowly trained to doubt your own reactions, it's kind of what's happening in the background. And then you start to feel responsible for other people's emotions.
Told me Hobbs would leave my lap before you had to go. Fine.
And then in order to deal with that, it's just like you also know that the cycle and the harm becomes clear, and it becomes part of your nervous system. And we become attached and bonded and invested. And that ends up not being a character flaw. That's actually conditioning. And what's one of the confusing parts of a recovery is that, you can understand what happened and still feel stuck emotionally and physically. And that's because this cycle of abuse that I'm going to talk you through, it doesn't just affect your thoughts, it rewires your nervous system. And your body learned something different to survive those strategies. Right? It learned when to stay quiet, it learned when to appease, when to scan for danger. So when the relationship does end, the cycle often keeps running inside you. That's why education alone isn't enough. And that's why healing is a process and it's not a single realization. So that's why we're here. It's what we're going to do in this session. I'm going to break everything down step by step for you. And later on, I'll open it up to Q&A. And for the replay viewers, it's just like you can post your comments below, and I'll help you make sense of everything. All right, so let me share my screen so we can, there it is, stop, and here we go. All right, so I'm just going to take you through this, and in this whole document, you will get in your email, and you'll be able to go through the whole thing. The whole document, I think, is like 60, 70, some odd pages long, but I'm only going to go through a little bit of it. I am going to do a quick review over what's in the document, and we've touched on some of this before. And this whole document, it isn't just about information. It's actually, it's a map through narcissism recovery. Narcissism itself, there's a lot of information on that, on narcissism that you can learn. But what we learn is that sometimes it's just like knowing and understanding this doesn't really help us heal. So this is more about healing. And therapists don't always understand it. Therapists that have been through it have been trained through it too. But for the most part, they don't. But inside us, what happens is, what happens? We feel a lot of self-doubt. Our nervous system's always on high alert. And to survive these relationships, what are we doing? We're just constantly in these emotional roller coasters. And we start shrinking our identity. And the voice in our head, sounds a lot like theirs. And what I'm going to take you through is, this is for anyone who's ready to stop spiraling and to start healing. And this document has a bunch of things in it. I'm not going to go through all of it, but there is a 4-part abuse cycle, which I'll take you quickly through. There's a link in the chat, which has the longer version of it. Today, we're going to focus on how that cycle evolves into emotional self-erasure. And in 2 weeks, I'll take you through the Narcovery 8F's roadmap, and that helps you reverse the damage. But this is the toxic abuse cycle. Many of you might be familiar with it already. It's been around for a while. But there are basically 4 phases in the toxic abuse cycle. And many survivors of narcissistic abuse or and emotional manipulation recognize this pattern. And they just didn't have words for it. But it does have words. It has been labeled, it has been studied, and it's called the toxic abuse cycle. And while it may feel confusing or overwhelming, the truth is the cycle is not your fault. Right? You didn't walk into it knowingly. You were groomed bit by bit. And this cycle is going to help you understand what it is. And the 4 parts are the love bombing and the honeymoon phase, the calm, the tension, and the incident. But what you're going to realize is you've gone through many abuse cycles. Because after a blowout or an argument, there's going to be a honeymoon phase, and then calm, and then another blowout. And this cycle is going to repeat again and again and again. You're going to see that what happens is this is a lie, and this is reality. When you're in this part of the cycle, your brain is flooded with dopamine. When you're in this part of the cycle, your brain is flooded with cortisol. And what ends up happening is it's a very addictive cycle. The first phase I'll take you through is just the honeymoon phase. This is where everything seems to be really, beautiful. The manipulation is built through mirroring. They read your body language. If there's something you love, they love it. And they just kind of adapt to all of those things. I won't go into too much detail, but you can read this on your own. And then after that, there's a calm phase because it takes a lot of work for them in order to maintain that facade, to be the Prince Charming, to be the Snow White. And then when things settle, the truth starts to rise, and they're listening and they're supporting you. But what they're also doing in this calm phase is they're mining for vulnerabilities. This is where you feel safe enough to share. And it might be things from your childhood, it might be things from your teenage life, all of those things. And they just kind of stare them and store them because they're going to use them against you later. The next phase is the tension phase, and this is calculated and it's meant to destabilize you. And what it feels like in the tension phase is like you're walking on eggshells. There's something that shifted. You know that they can be loving and kind and feel compassionate, but yet they seem to take that away. It's like a knob that suddenly gets turned down, and it makes you feel really unsettled. And this tension is calculated. And then the next is the incident, right? And this is where things blow up. And it could be an argument, it could be a silent agreement, it could be a cruel comment or a betrayal. And the early on, these incidences are small, and the small ones are deliberate tests. They want to see what you will tolerate. Will you tolerate me losing my temper? Will you tolerate lies? Will you tolerate this? And keep taking me back. And then once you go through this cycle several times, what ends up happening is your self-esteem starts to lower. It starts to get affected more and more and more. And what makes this cycle so dangerous is every time that you go through that cycle, it is you'll start questioning your reality, what's real, what isn't real, and that's not an accident. And cognitive dissonance forms because we're living in two realities. How could the person who does all these wonderful things and makes me feel so loved also be the source of pain? And love and pain are coming from the very same person. And that causes something called cognitive dissonance. And the truth is, the version of them that hurt you is the one that they actually are. This is the reality. And in order to hurt you even more, they need this. So it's like love and love and pain just kind of keep going back and forth. And that's what causes this emotional split. And we have to live with two different realities at the same time. And this does change your brain chemistry because both of those states are very intense and it actually gets very, very addictive. But just be assured it's not your fault, right? Why didn't I leave sooner? How did I end up here? You were groomed. We're going to go into the phases of this abuse now. This is what we're going to focus on today. And I know I went through that really quickly. If you need to read the whole document, you're free to. And there is a link where I go deep into that toxic abuse cycle. But today, what we're going to focus on is explore that toxic abuse cycle, but look closer what happens to you over time. When you're in a toxic relationship, the relationship evolves over time, and that's why it often gets harder to leave the longer that you stay. And at first glance, it may look like a normal relationship with a few ups and downs. But when we actually start to break it down, we start to see a pattern of psychological conditioning. And this is not just a timeline of events. It's a map of how, you were gradually trained to abandon yourself. And that is the goal of this, is to get you to abandon them yourself in order to take care of them. You can see the way the relationship works is when you first meet them, it's mostly love bombing, calm, and a little bit of tension, a little bit of incidences. And early on, these are directed at other people. And then, the tension and incidents grows, but they start to be directed more at you. And then things get really escalated, and these incidences can be very, very extreme. And most relationships have a tendency to end here, but some stay. And this is where we move to the place of where a self-erasure happens. And I'm going to go through these cycles for you, so you can understand. Because in the beginning, it's everything that you ever wanted. Right? And love bombing tends to be very intense, and you're adored, and you're validated, and you're pursued with focus and charm. You're convinced that you've met the one. And at this phase, the cycle looks harmless. Love bombing is the dominant part. Calm, can feel peaceful and hopeful, and tension is very minimal. And it might just be just this vague sense of unease. And the incidents that happen, they tend to be subtle. And if you look back now, you can kind of see more and more of them. But they're not dominant. And they might rant about an ex or a coworker or a family member. Their stuff tends to be directed about somebody else because this is a test. They're watching to see what your reaction is in order to see what you will tolerate. And then phase two is the testing turns towards you, right? They're no longer just venting about others. They're actually critiquing you, and it's very subtle at first. Right? I'm not saying this because I'm saying this because I'm only saying this because I care. It could be a comment, or it could be you're not going to wear that, or you're not going to finish that dessert, are you? Those little passive aggressive little things early on. Those are the earlier tests, and they're to see what you will tolerate, right? And you may even be working harder to fix those things. And in those early phases, you might be blaming yourself or hoping that things will go back to where they are. But this is how your self-esteem starts to erode. And then phase three, there's more tension and the incidents escalate, right? You can see there is still love in there, but the tension, it's like the walking on eggshells is far more. And these incidences they can be extreme. Violence can appear in these phases. And love bombing becomes actually far more rare. And it almost shows up as breadcrumbing at points. And it's just enough to keep you hooked. This takes them energy so they can do the hurt, but they don't want to give the energy. They just want to inflict the damage, and the tension is constant. So you feel anxious or on edge. Incidents grow louder, and verbal abuse, emotional withdrawal, guilt tripping, gaslighting, blame. All of these things exist far more in these incidences, and you do feel like you're walking on eggshells a lot more. And you tell yourself that this isn't who they are, and you cling to that memory from the beginning. But your nervous system knows something better because the state that we're actually in here is in a survival state. And if it goes to this phase four, and this goes to the collapse of self, right? And the breadcrumbing is pretty much the only source of love. Calm is very brief, and you're walking on eggshells most of the time. And the incidences are loud and intense, but they're meant to keep you living in fear. And this is where, a lot of people just kind of end these relationships. What you're realizing is that this relationship isn't built on love; it's built on fear, and the only way that you can survive it is to be living in a survival state. And what you're realizing now is that this relationship has a hierarchy, and they're in control. They've groomed you to this space where you're living in fear all the time. And, they're oftenly treating you like your servant or a possession. And you're expected to appease and obey their every single need and every whim and anticipate their needs and their whims and absorb their dysregulation. And they may throw in a kind moment here or a flash of calm here or there. But now those moments are just, they feel like crumbs. And they just show up only when you're completely compliant and you accept the role of being the performer. And what we talk about here is reversing the timeline. Because most people, when I take on a new client, it's just like this is where they come. If you look at nervous system wise, you're living in constant fear and constant tension, right? And then slowly as we go through the recovery process, and this is what the recovery process is. And I don't want to say that this is just like 2 or 3 sessions. There's a long process of building stability and safety that takes place. And recovery, it also happens in phases because we don't jump from total collapse to empowerment overnight. That's a process that takes time, and that takes skill, and that takes somebody who's been through it to guide you through it. And the goal is to, when we first start, is because you're living in fear for so long, we have to establish safety, internal safety and external safety. And then in order to go to the next phase, we got to go from confusion to clarity. It's just understand that what you're going through actually makes sense. And these survival strategies that are taking place, these protective parts that we have that are making most of the decisions for us, like they're doing that on purpose because they're trying to keep you alive and they're trying to keep you safe. And eventually we shut down those survival straits. But in order to do that, we need to build self-trust. You have to remember what is real, that you are real, and these things that happened in the past. And then we don't look for breadcrumbing from others. We actually exist in a state of true self love. It's where it's like our needs, our desires, everything moves. And that's as far as we're going to go today. There is more to it. I go deeper into reversing the cycle, and these are the 8 F's. But I will go into that deeper in 2 weeks. But let me stop the share. All right, Camille says I'm older. Hang on. Camille says I'm older, and I became seriously dysregulated, and I'm working with it and very slowly making progress. And I have continued to have intrusive thoughts. What are the best ways to do that? All right. Well, first, I just want to say this clearly, is that nothing you're describing is unusual or it's a sign that something is wrong with you. So just kind of take that pause for a little bit. I want to explain intrusive thoughts because after prolonged relational stress, it's just like there's a nervous system response, and that's what it is. You're talking about a nervous system response. And this is not a thinking problem, right? This is the brain's attempt to regain safety and control after being destabilized over time. And you can see that, what we talked about today was the grooming process and how that destabilization happened over time. Trying to stop that part, it usually makes it louder at first. And what helps more is learning how to interrupt that loop because it is a loop. And one of the ways that you can do that is trying to orient more towards the present, right? Noticing your body, feeling your body. Because this is a nervous system loop. It's an anxiety loop that kind of replays old dangers. And what we try to do is just try to reset the nervous system slowly over time. And progress is often slow at first. And especially when this happens later in life. And it's not because healing isn't possible. But your system has learned certain survival patterns. They've learned them very deeply. But the good news is this doesn't settle with just this does settle, and it does take time, because keep in mind it's just like you've been living in that survival loop, anticipating. We talked about what it feels like to walk on eggshells, and even when they leave, their thoughts suddenly become your thoughts. So it kind of makes sense that the looping thoughts are still there. Yeah, well, it's just like, and I get it. And I'll just add one more thing because so many people talk about these repetitive thought loops that kind of happen. And, and when this kind of happens, especially it can be frightening because, it's kind of like flashbacks and we're reliving these traumas again and again and again. And at some point, it's just like we do get frustrated because we're like, yeah, the past is behind us. So why does my brain keep going back into these places? And it can bring a lot of grief and a lot of shame. But when the system itself has been overwhelmed for a really long time. And it is trying to regulate. And that's what it's trying to do. That's what flashbacks are actually trying to do. There are systems back in your system that just kind of start to come forward again. And it's partly because you're safe enough to process this. Because in intrusive thoughts, there aren't failures of healing. They're signs that your nervous system is still on high alert because you've been under a long period of emotional threat. And it actually makes sense because you're not broken and you're not behind. And if at some point you do want to talk about this one on one, I can help. Do you think EMDR is helpful in therapeutic approach to recovery from these types of relationships, or does trauma require something different and more? EMDR is a very, very powerful tool to help. The dropout rates of EMDR, and I learned this because I got my training also through Janina Fisher, is that they can also be re-traumatizing for some. I think it's a tool to use alongside of other forms of trauma work, and with a skilled practitioner. Because it does work so deeply into your subconscious mind. It's very, very helpful. Especially, it works the best for single incident traumas. And that's the research is just like that's what it works the best for. Or if it's just a clearly defined single traumatic event that you need to work for, that's what it works. And many people get a lot of relief from it, and it is really good. And I use some EMDR techniques. I don't use EMDR itself, but I do use some, just the left and right bilateral stuff in my practice. So I do know that it's really good at settling the nervous system, and I've seen it work really well with clients. And I've also seen it fail with clients as well who just weren't ready for it just yet. So make sure that you find a qualified EMDR specialist. Make sure that you do have support, because the sessions themselves are going to open you up pretty deeply, and the integration the 2-3 days later afterwards, especially in the first 48 to 72 hour mark afterwards, it's very important that you don't get re-triggered in those little moments. So it's just like where things can get complicated with with our relationships is the trauma isn't one event. right? It's several events. It's repetitive. It's relational, and it changes your identity, and it affects how you think and how you feel, and it also affects how you regulate over time. And in those cases, EMDR is effective to help with just those little parts of it, and it's part of a broader approach that also works with the nervous system, also works with attachment traumas. And it also helps with your sense of self because it's not just memory processing we're talking about, because it's not that an EMDR is wrong. It's that this kind of trauma often needs more content and more integration. A single EMDR session will give you some relief. I can see that happening. But it's you also need that clinical support in between sessions. And any clinician that has a single meeting and does EMDR on you, I'd question them. I would think you'd need 2 or 3 sessions before you do your EMDR, unless you do have the support and the person that's supporting you is setting you up for stuff. I'm glad you asked that question because yeah, it does help. Um, it uh, it is one of those processes, but I don't want it to be like one of those things where it's partial or short lived, and that's not a failure of therapy of the person. It's just a sign that the trauma that you have is layered. It is stacked. And we do call it it's like compound traumas that are kind of stacked on top of each other. And but if you ever want to talk through it, I'd be happy to chat with you about it. And if you have the experience, or if you have somebody that you will have in mind, we can just check their credentials and see how it goes. Colleen, what about nightmares? I've been out of the relationship for 10 years and still have nightmares. And I've tried several different meds, and I can't make them stop. All right. Well, I'm really glad you asked that. Right. And I just want to kind of say this first. Nightmares, from my point of view, the persisting ones, this long after, it don't mean that you're broken or you can't be healed or that this damage is permanent. It doesn't. Or that the healing hasn't actually happened. Partly the nightmares show up when you're safe enough to process them, right? And one of the things I kind of point out, and especially if you look at PTSD, is if you look at soldiers and they go to war and they're exposed to extreme traumas, they don't have PTSD symptoms while they're in battle. Like you didn't have those symptoms when you were in your fight or flight state, and it happens when you're in safety. When safety comes up, that's where trauma recovery kind of comes up. And if you want to cure a soldier of PTSD, put him back on the front lines because he'll go back into the survival state. But the whole thing is survival isn't living, and we can't keep people living in a survival state to avoid these nightmares. And what you're going to realize is medication. It can sometimes reduce the intensity, but they don't always address the underlying issue, right? Which is the system that learned that it wasn't safe to fully stand down. So your system tends to be on high alert, which is a system that learned that it wasn't safe to fully stand down. And that makes sense. What helps the most in these cases is work that focuses on nervous system regulation. Things like breath work and things like safety and integration. And it's not just the symptoms to suppress our symptoms. Because when the body starts to feel safe again, sleep often changes. And the fact that this is still happening, it doesn't mean that recovery is impossible. It just usually means that this layer hasn't been met yet, hasn't been processed yet, and hasn't been brought to the surface to where it needs to be. But yeah, if you want to talk about this personally, I can share a link to. Let me. Where is the calendar? There's a link to the calendar. But yeah, here's the link to the calendar. If it helps, I can talk you through it. All right. I'm glad that answered your question. Thank you so much. Good evening. Happy New Year. Happy New Year. All right. Lisa, how you doing today?
Me, Lisa?
Yeah,
Two E's.
Lisa.
Good. I was thinking a lot
hmm
while you were going through the information, and like one thing that really hit me was in the love bombing stage, and they they present us everything you ever wanted.
Mm,
And I remember in those early months telling my son that, this guy he's it. And there's no place to go from here for me.
yeah.
Like, I really believe that.
Mm,
And so I think that my biggest issue in all of this has been convincing myself that there is a place to go after this.
mm. Good. But notice that what helps actually is that mapping, is just kind of seeing it on a chart to see that you weren't alone in this. Because love momming, what they do is they match your deepest longings, and it makes you feel familiar, right? And Ginny is correct; they mirror you. It's exactly what they do. And it can feel like for you, it's just like finally, this is the one. So it's just like, but then the cost shows up. Right. And then, didn't question the system. What did you do? You questioned yourself. You learned that love became with a price. What you're naming is actually really important, because love bombing, it often doesn't, it does feel really, really good. It feels right, right? It feels perfect. And it mirrors exactly what you've been longing for, and sometimes for years. So when the dynamic changes, the mind doesn't think, oh, this is wrong. It thinks, oh, this is the price in order to get that. Right? It's just like a loaf of bread. I really want that soft, but that cost of that bread keeps going up over time, and that's not wrong. It's just like your subconscious thinks, oh, the price is going up, but I still love this bread. But this belief, that connection, requires self-sacrifice. And that actually doesn't come from a weakness in you. It actually comes from the conditioning that they can raise the price of that loaf of bread higher and higher over time. And over time, the nervous system learns that if I want this closeness, I have to tolerate the pain. And what you're realizing is that cognitive dissonance that you're living through was the fact that the pain and the love were coming from the very same person. And the brain has to normalize it somehow. And part of the healing is just, slowly unlearning that equation, realizing that love isn't something that you earn by enduring this kind of harm. And what you're also realizing as you're kind of coming out of it and looking into other connections that you have, real intimacy doesn't come with a price tag like that. And if there's a reoccurring price, that's not love. That's leverage. It's like that little, the cheese that they put on the mousetrap. It's like, oh, but it smells so good. Yeah, it does. And it feels like it's free, but there is a cost to it. And if the cheese is free, then there's no cost. There's no trap attached to it. Hey, Derek, how you doing tonight? There he is. You got a face.
Yeah, I'm good.
Mm.
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Well, you're pretty familiar with the abuse cycle, and but how does it fit into the toxic timeline for you? What do you notice about your situation, and where you are now?
I find recently divorced, and it was a 8-year marriage and 6-year divorce.
Mm-hmm.
And in there, somewhere around year 2, my kids got turned against me.
Mm-hmm.
Get to see my daughter, but my son doesn't want to see me or even accept gifts. We used to have such a close relationship. So the way my wife used to punish me, even when we were in the marriage, was to take the kids away. So this is something she knows hurts me. And so there's moments where I only have 1 or 2 sessions a month with my daughter. She'll cancel one or both. Because she doesn't feel like it. It's her own birthday, whatever. So there's just this coping mechanism I've developed, which is to look forward to something, dread it mildly, that it could get canceled, and sort of get to it, enjoy it. But it's just, I can't fully be joyful prior. Because there's sometimes she'll cancel an hour before while we're driving to Mississauga. So there's just this frustration that goes on, that although I'm grateful and enjoying the moments when I'm with my daughter, can't fully be in this joyful place ever. That's one thing I want to deal is with this year is to regain my sense of joy. And it doesn't have anything to do with this other situation. I can develop joy in other parts of my life. And just talking to you about it is helping.
Good.
But it's this thing of the dread of having to now raise the funds to go battle for what's called reunification therapy, and sort of go through all that rigmarole. And it's a risk. She could cancel, she could pull out, she could convince my son and daughter to not go.
Yeah.
But somehow, what got me through the rough parts was just, I'm going to keep trying. I'm even going to die trying. It's better for me just to keep trying, enjoy the little moments.
I know. But I want you to see that your system learned that looking forward to something actually creates pain. Right?
Yeah.
So you can kind of see how there's cognitive dissonance starting to appear. So it's just like, and that's not depression. It's not a lack of gratitude. I just want you to realize what that's called is actually survival intelligence. You have survival intelligence. In order to even cope with these things, you do have to be in a survival state. Right? But I want you to realize what is true and what can't be changed. You just kind of realize that what is true. It's like you love your child deeply. Those tender moments with your child really matter to you. These are all 100% true. But I also want you to see that in terms of cognitive dissonance, it's like that joy also carries risk. So you can see what that means into your body. So your body is choosing a little bit of restraint. Right? Because what you're describing makes a lot of sense. Because like when you access your child, it has been taken away or made unpredictable. It's like your nervous system learns that hope can be dangerous. Right? You can kind of recognize what that feels like. Right? There's a part of you that is feeling that, but there's also a part of you that's seeing the part of you that's seeing that. Right? And that's kind of where you start to go into your higher self, the observing self. You can see your own pain. Right? So instead of letting yourself feel excited, your body does what it does naturally, it braces. Because it's trying to protect you from the pain of disappointment. And it doesn't mean that you don't care. It actually means the opposite. It means you care so deeply. And that frustration that you're feeling, it's not ingratitude, right? It's just grief mixed with vigilance. And that joy hasn't disappeared. It's just being guarded right now. So you have joy inside you. You have love inside you. It just needs to be guarded right now to protect your nervous system. And part of the healing, isn't focusing on yourself to feel happy. It's helping your system slow down those trust moments of connection that can exist without them being taken away. And that takes time because that kind of repair, it takes a lot of time, a lot of support, and especially when children are involved, because we are inherently connected to our children. And when they get taken away, it's just kind of like our identity also erodes. And then it becomes, the body isn't blocking joy, it's protecting your heart. So for that survival system that you're using right now, that makes sense. That makes sense. I don't have, there's no 3-step formula. There's no any of those things because your nervous system is also carrying a lot of grief. You're also trying to deal with powerlessness and helplessness and all of those other things, and that takes special support, and it takes time to recover from. But it's not because you're a bad father or that you abandoned them in some way, and it's not actually because they've abandoned you either. Because if you can just look at what we talked about right now as understanding your own survival state, I want you to notice the children are also in a survival state. If you notice what you went through, the levels of control and the levels of manipulation, it's just like the kids are under that same kind of control and same kind of conditioning. And what do kids do? They naturally go to, they naturally get attracted to these people because they feel like they can protect them. And what their kids are actually looking for is safety. And without that connection, it's really hard for you to implant those seeds. But those tiny moments of connection over time, they do build. Like you are a safe person. You do show up, and it is a process, and it is hard. Does that help?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
I'm so glad. Here it is. Yeah, for a client who's usually free and able to go to sleep around 10 p.m., instead scrolls their phone until 2 to 4 a.m. before falling asleep. This pattern has been going on for quite some time, and it's been very difficult to adjust to. Is this related to trauma or depression, or how should this be addressed from your point of view? Yeah, and I'm really glad you asked that question because again, it goes back into nervous system, right? And what I want you to do is just to understand that this behavior isn't laziness, or it isn't you have bad habits, or it's nothing to do with that. It's more about just nervous system regulation. Right. And like you can go to bed, sleep comes, but when does it come? You have to be completely exhausted for it in order to that to happen. And that pattern is persistent because of the effort. And what does scrolling do, right? If we look at the toxic abuse cycle that we talked about, right? So you've got the love bombing, the calm, the tension, and the incident, right? So what's happening is like you get those triggers, and it makes it really hard to sleep. So you look for something to numb, right? So you're looking at ways to love bomb yourself. So that's why those tools kind of go, and they soothe you for a while till the exhaustion hits. You get the calm, but what happens the next night is the tension builds because the trauma is still there. And then that's going to create another trigger. And then you repeat the loop again and again and again. So we talked about the toxic abuse cycle and how it goes on to others. But I also want you to kind of note how we do it to ourselves, right? Because this pattern is incredibly common. And it's important to understand it with compassion. Because the goal eventually is to reverse the abuse cycle altogether. It's to go into those discomfortable memories and those uncomfortable places from a safe point of view and stay with them till the tension goes away. And then we remove the trigger, right? For many people, staying up scrolling actually isn't about avoiding sleep. It's about avoiding the moment that the mind slows down. Because bedtime is often when intrusive thoughts and memories and emotional discomfort cut surface. And remember the earlier question, it's just like flashbacks and ruminating thoughts and all of those things. It's because you're safe enough to process it. Your nervous system is saying it's safe enough. And when you go to sleep, you're busy all day. You got all the distractions you need to keep you busy. But it's just like, it's also when your nervous system is saying, hey, this is unprocessed. Right? Well, depression can sometimes play a role. This pattern often points more to a nervous system that doesn't feel safe enough to fully power down. Right? So, from my point of view, it's just addressing this isn't about willpower, isn't about strict sleep rules, isn't about medication. All those things can help, and they're part of it. But it's about helping the system feel safer at night, and then gradually replacing that stimulation with regulation skills rather than forcing shutdown, right? Because and when this has happened for a long period of time, it becomes part of that habit, and that usually helps to work with the body. Start with the body. Now, what is it that your nervous system likes? Sometimes what I feel is warm water can help, right? And I'm just going back into somatic things. Taking baths can help. Warm tea can help. No social media for at least an hour before you even go to sleep. And when this has been happening for a really long time, it helps work with the body. To start with the body, not the mind, not the thoughts, but start with the body and slowly building a nighttime safety routine, reducing the need for distractions. And if you need help with that, because it is the core underlying traumas, those actual memories that kind of keep replaying, that takes support to work through. And I want you to realize your nervous system isn't procrastinating sleep; it's actually protecting itself, right? Um, and it's just doing it in the only way that it knows how. Um, and uh, and I hope that answers your question. I think you're asking for specific approaches. Um, Specific approaches you feel may help with sleep issues in trauma. Yeah. So yeah, from my point of view, like sleep is tends to be rooted in, especially one that's rooted in trauma. Usually, ways to improve it is trying to stop trying to force sleep. Because instead work on helping your nervous system to feel safe enough to rest. And there's a bunch of different nervous system approaches that can help regulate your sleep. And this, breath work, if you've ever tried that, even right now, if you try exhaling longer than you inhale, what you're going to realize is even if you check your pulse right now, as you inhale, your heart rate goes up. As you exhale, your heart rate goes down. So I want you to just notice what happens when you start to change your breathing pattern. Exhale 2 to 3 times longer than you inhale. Because it's just like, all right, so you're inhaling.
Hi, baby.
You're
I'm
slowing
sorry.
your.
Did I bother you?
Sorry. I'm going to mute that. But yeah, the breath work is kind of one. I'm just giving you practical things because eventually it is the those core wounds that need to be healed. But intrusive thoughts, they do settle once they've been acknowledged as stress responses, rather than the threat as something to eliminate. What you usually find is the resistance usually keeps the system activated. It's just like, I am not sleeping, and then you attack yourself for not sleeping. Where it's just kind of like trying to slow down that resistance a little bit more. I am activated. Sleep is really hard. Try to get back into this moment because our mind is going to try to take us back into the past, and it can't be done in one session. It can't be done all at once. It just takes time because many sleep disruptions they come from unresolved emotional threat from the past, and especially after being in toxic or unsafe relationships. So it's like when that layer starts to get worked through, sleep often shifts naturally and on its own. And then what you're going to find is consistency over intensity. And these small little things that we do, these small little repeated practices done nightly, they tend to help more than any big techniques that are used occasionally. And it becomes pattern recognition. Keep in mind, you are in these abuse patterns. And the self healing cycles are also something that you can start doing on your own because consistency matters. And the goal actually isn't perfect sleep. It's helping the body to trust that nighttime is safe again. And when that happens, sleep improves as a byproduct because you don't feel safe. When things are quiet, what happens in these toxic relationships is, we wait for that other shoe to drop. Whenever there's peace, even a little bit of peace now and again, we can't trust it. And our nervous system knows, and okay, but they're going to explode again. And if we're starting to live in that state where we're anticipating that, then you can see why sleep can be really, really difficult. Right? Cool. But if you do need help, Schumann, we can definitely book a call, and I can talk you through what the recovery process goes through. And that's one thing I do with my clients is I do monitor their sleep. And if you notice you are waking up at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, that's a sign that there's unresolved trauma there. And it's stuff that can be worked through. So the other thing, monitor is dream. Because your dreams they do tell us things. There is information in our dreams. Carl Jung has put a lot of time into dream analysis, and the dreams rarely mean what they mean to me. Lisa says one thing that helps me sleep is to remind myself that I'm safe. And when I start to feel anxious and unsafe, I say, "May I be safe. May I be peaceful. May I be at ease." I love that. Yeah. So you're talking about the kindness cycle. It is the self-parenting cycle. It's the understanding first, not forcing sleep, but allowing it to be there. The other thing I'm going to give you, and this isn't public, but where is it? I have a sleep meditation. Here it is. I have a sleep meditation, and anyone that wants to use this is free to. It's not a public link, so you can't find it by searching it. But if you do click on it right now, you can open it up in a tab and just bookmark it or save it to your playlist, and that should help. Um, so I hope that answers your question. If you do want to ask anything in person about trauma and recovery, I can help. But sleep is a symptom, right? And sleep is fixing your sleep is a byproduct of settling and working with your nervous system. I hope that answers your question. Chris is asking also, doesn't sleep come from the subconscious, which can be controlled? Can't control that. My morning mood is often affected by dreams. When this happens, what works to clear your mind? And you're absolutely right. Sleep and dreaming come from parts of the mind that can't be controlled by willpower. Right? We are talking about subconscious programming, and I think most people say it's just like we have what 2 to 5% consciousness available, and 95% of what happens to us is in the unconscious. And just conscious willpower alone, it's just like if you look at what it has to manage, it's rarely enough. And dreams aren't something that we choose. I wish we could choose our dreams, but they're nervous systems and subconscious processing, emotional material. That's what's happening in the background, which is why I always ask about sleep. Because it's just like sleep is part of the recovery process, and making sure that we get enough and monitoring and keeping track of it. And, when we get bad nights of sleep, not to overtax our nervous system during that day because it hasn't had a chance to recover from the previous night. And when morning mood is affected by your dreams, it's not usually about the dream itself. It's not. It's usually about the state that the body wakes up in. And the system may still be carrying fear or grief or vigilance from the night before. And you can notice that the dreams have an intense thing to kind of follow. There is information in there that we can unpack in a session or two. But still, keep in mind, it's just like those are just symptoms. Right? If you have a headache, it's just like, all right, Tylenol will deal with the symptom temporarily. But what's the core underlying thing? What caused that headache? And we can't just live on Tylenol if it's a perceptive kind of thing. And what tends to help isn't trying to clear the mind, but helping the body reorient to the present. It's just simple things. I do this thing where it's just, look left and look right, look left and look right. It's orienting yourself to the room, right? Feeling your feet, noticing gravity holding you, something that is real, right? And just kind of holding the safety in this moment. Our mind doesn't feel it safe, but our body can kind of start with the body. We'll start there. Just remind the systems like that was then. What happened was bad. Absolutely was then. But I'm also here in the now, and here in the now, I need to practice safety at first. And then over time, the nervous system feels safer overall. And then both dreams and your mood often they soften. Right? And if this is something you like support with, it's just like absolutely we can talk you through it. But we'll get through the core of it. What we'll do is we'll wrap it up for today. And I hope you do see that this grooming cycle that happens, it's not your fault, right? And these survival systems, they kind of live in the background, and the grooming takes time to undo. And what the whole thing is everyone's here. They're here because they want to get better. Right. I think it's one question, Kareen, when a narcissist finally admitted some accountability, do they really mean it? And Kim's response is, no, it's always a ploy. Keep in mind that's if we look at the abuse cycle, that's also could be part of love bombing. We don't know if it's genuine, and I also want you to know the words and actions are different. And when people's actions don't match their words, you know, then that's a pretty big red flag, right? Because the important question is sometimes a person can sound sincere. When they admit accountability, they can sound sincere, and in that moment, you may even want to believe them. Keep in mind, you want to believe them. But with narcissistic or highly manipulative people dynamics, accountability is often peripheral. It's temporary. Oh, I'll give you accountability so I can suck you back into my cycle. And it's temporary, it's conditional. And that's what you have to notice. If it is permanent, then they'll have to prove it. And if they don't want to prove it, I just want to say I'm accountable, then that tells you something, doesn't it? Right? Because do their behaviors actually change? Ignore the words. The words are just noise. Behavior is what we want to look at. And is that accountability consistent over time? That's what you want to ask. Do they tolerate discomfort without becoming defensive or blaming or reversing role? Because in many cases, these admissions of accountability, You know, they're more of a way of just to reduce the tension in the moment, to regain access to you, or to stabilize the relationship just enough so they can bring you back into the love bombing phase. And from a healing perspective, the question isn't do they actually mean it? And for me, it's the question is did it actually lead to something lasting? You know, was there something lasting observable? Not in that moment, but a month later, 5 months later, a year later, 5 years later. That's how I know if it's real or not. And if it isn't, then it doesn't mean that you misunderstood. It means that you're responding with hope. And that tells me that you're human. It tells me that you have love, and you have compassion, you have dignity, and all of those things. Instead of having it for somebody else, have it for yourself first. What does somebody with love and dignity of their self respond when, you know, somebody claims responsibility but their actions don't match their words? What does a loving person do? Right? I think that's what you're going to find is helpful, and that may mean in the moment, you know, sure, but real accountability shows up consistently over behavior, and not just with insights and temporary apologies. All right, so we will finish with that. And you're very welcome, Jennifer. You're welcome, Corrine. You're welcome, Jen, Jean, Lisa. Thank you so much. Camille, Chris. Thank you for your questions. And yeah, all the links are going to disappear after this, but you will find them again if you watch the replay. And I will share that link, and then this full document you'll also get in your email. So watch out for that. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you guys in 2 weeks, hopefully. Bye.